All right, and we are live. Do I sound okay, everybody? Do I sound good? Just trying to mess with this thing a little bit and see if I can get my audio to just be a little bit crisper. Tell me how I sound if anybody seems okay. Here we go. So I have a complaint, and I get really tired of complaints about like the littlest tiny things that are so non-effectual. And here's one. Please stop posting these annoying coming up live stream notifications and keeping them around for 6 hours, man. It's so annoying. Like, what am I supposed to do with it? Hey, figure it out. Be a problem solver and figure it out for yourself. I've had a number of people ask me if I can schedule my live streams ahead of time, because previously I would do them last minute because I was lazy or didn't have the timings down or whatever. And every single time people would complain about the short notice and not knowing that it was happening and stuff. So I'm going to keep doing it the exact way that I'm doing it right now because it's working for me. I'm becoming more successful this way. So I'm going to go ahead and say, figure it out. I'm sure you can find a way around that issue. Okay. Problem is not the notification. The problem is the sticky event on my subscription feed. You are the only channel doing it still. Again, it's not a notification. I hide the video. Hey, I'm just there for you all the time. That's how you have to manage that. All right. All right. I sound great. Thank you, Tap for Nerd. Good to see you in here, man. Hey, if you guys want to listen to some dope, just like background music, go check out Tap for Nerd's stream. He always has music on. All right, guys, we got a lot to talk about. Let me see where you guys are from here. Let's see. Please keep the notifications coming. You got it, bro. Paris. I sound 10 out of 10. Awesome, guys. Awesome. New microphone. Yes, I do got a new microphone. I have a new microphone and I have a new sound interface. Thank you so much, guys. All of that comes from your support on Patreon. All of the money that I make through this endeavor basically is going right back into this for you guys. I want the videos to become better. I want my whole setup to become better, just so the experience is much more lasting for you guys, instead of listening to, so I hate that there are like groups or podcasts or YouTubers that have way more followers than me, and they sound like they're talking into a can. So yeah. All of the money from like my Patreon, all the money from the Twitter, everything basically goes right back into this. So I appreciate you guys so much. And yeah, that's what we're going to do. All right. Here we go. Let's get into it, guys. We have so much to talk about today. Obviously, I have titled 2 previous episodes, Hot Pocket. I have Hot Pocket 1.0, Hot Pocket 2.0. You can go back through my live streams and watch those if you wish. But today we have Hot Pockets, plural. The situation is developing in such a way that it appears to me that the Ukrainians are trying very desperately to not show any failure through the month of October. They're holding everything with the maximum amount of intensity that they can. The Russians are still progressing in these areas. It's not going as well as I think they had hoped, but they're really stalling for this election. They don't want anything bad to happen right before the election that may dissuade people from voting for Kamala, because it's a Biden Kamala, admin, basically. Nothing's changing. And the only chance Zelensky has really is to either escalate this war into something that has to involve NATO, or through some sort of Western support intervention, and they're only going to get that with the Democrats. So that's sort of the situation we are at. I will take us over to the map, guys. We have so much to talk about today. We got a lot going on. Remember, if you want to ask questions and you want those questions answered on air in real time, you can ask those through super chats. I always get to those. I always put them up so it gets seen. If you want to ask questions, you can always just throw them up in the chat. I might not get to them. I'm not always looking at the chat. So yeah. And then if you guys want to find more of my work, go to my Telegram, Twitter, and my Patreon. All of those links can be found in the description of this video. You will find more of my content there. The new Demonetized will be coming out tomorrow. I just got it all set up. It's going to be a really long one, probably close to an hour. I haven't done one for a while, and there's been a lot of combat footage. It's also going to include some Israel-Lebanon stuff, so be on the lookout for that, guys. All right, let's get into it. Here we go. Satellite radio. I forgot to retweet my live stream, so let me do that, but I will take us over to the map and we can begin. All right, so I'm going to start up here in the Kursk region. Hold on just one second. Just going to retweet this. Live now. Boom, and we're done. All right, let's get it. I hope everybody's doing good today. I'm in my, oh, does the mic keep cutting out? I hope not. No, and it's not. I don't think it is. All right. Let's go over to the Kursk region. We have a small Russian advance here, capturing the town of Kolmakov, closing in on Struzda, right? So the Russians are almost back into the urban area that is Struzda. It's multiple little towns here that are all connected. The situation is getting very, very tight for the Ukrainians in terms of their logistics. There is reports that the Ukrainian armed forces have counterattacked towards Novovianovka, which indicates that they're still trying to hold on to this region, and that is horrible, right? You have Sadov in the east falling. You have a majority of the east falling right now, and the Ukrainians are more interested in maintaining their positions in Kursk rather than stabilizing the position in the east. I said it from the beginning. The Kursk operation, committing to this Kursk operation, was basically the identifier that the AFU has given up on the east of the country. They came to the same realization that I came to a year and a half ago when this attrition war started, and that is, why would we fight the Ukrainians all over Ukraine with all of these new incursions and large offensives and take all these casualties when we can make them extend their logistics lines all the way to the east of the country where they have their fortifications. They're going to sit in static fortifications, and we can use our artillery and aviation advantage to degrade them to the point where they lose combat capability, right? They should have lost combat capability in May, June 2022, but they got a new army, right? And then they should have lost it after the Bakhmut and the 2023 counteroffensive. Then they got another army, right? So they had their original army, then they had their Eastern European Soviet army, then they had the first NATO army, and then they got this second NATO army. It's very weak and much smaller. They didn't, it wasn't a big delivery after the failed 2023 counteroffensive, but they're basically on their fourth army at this point. So Russia is no longer fighting Ukraine, very obviously. They are fighting the NATO alliance in terms of material and financial backing that is being sent to Ukraine. So Ukraine decided that they weren't going to die by 1,000 cuts over here in the east, because that's what was going to happen, right? This is what I've talked about multiple times. It's just attrition. They're just going to keep attriting them, and Russia has more artillery shells and more glide bombs than Ukraine has positions and manpower to fill them. That's just the simple equation, and that's how I knew the whole time that there was no real chance of Ukraine winning. The only chance that Ukraine had to win would be to negotiate at some point, and they have completely lost that opportunity. So the Ukrainians are counterattacking. I'm not going to update my map until we have a solid idea of what's happening here, but just basically an advance into Novovianovka. Whatever, guys. You can see the town right here. Novovianovka. Whatever, bro. That one's impossible. But yeah, so the Kursk incursion and the fact that they are continuing to push manpower into this salient for really no good reason. There's no military objectives. There's nothing. It's just for PR. They don't want to get forced out of Kursk before the November elections. That's going to be a bad headline, and that is going to hurt their ability to gain support from the West. But after that point, I would expect that this is going to collapse in the December time period. I think that's very realistic. There's not a huge point in holding this at all anymore. Again, it's just for PR at this point. Zelensky said the other day, you can tell by the Kursk offensive that Ukraine is still in the fight and taking it to Russia, which is their whole narrative. And it doesn't make any sense because this is a complete failure. You have Russian strike UAVs operating overhead because the Ukrainians have no air defense. Helicopters are working, Russian artillery is working. This is just a firebag for the Ukrainians. Again, they love to get themselves into encirclements and cauldrons and, extend their logistics lines beyond what is feasible and then get crushed. And I don't get that military stratagem, but that's what they're working on. But yeah, just this one little advance here today. There are also reports. So I had a pretty good conversation with a few of my sources and one person who's not my source, but somebody who is, in the same open source information world that I am. And those conversations yielded a lot of very similar comments. First and foremost, the Ukrainian Armed Forces brigades that are now operating on most of the front line are between 20 and 40% staffed at maximum. There are, I think, 5 to 6, maybe 7 fully staffed brigades, but those fully staffed brigades are filled with new mobilized. They just keep a few at maximum strength so that they can move them around and push them into battle. They're constantly being refitted and remanned. So that's it's really not like a fully functioning brigade. It's just a full brigade. And just as an example, we saw the 47th Mechanized Brigade fighting down here in Avdiivka, which is the deep rear now. And they defended all of this, Semkivka, they defended Orchitny, they defended all of this area for over a year, since February 2022. So not over a year, but close to a year. And then they were recently pulled out and sent to the Kursk region. Now, my sources are indicating to me, and this was confirmed by 2 separate sources, my Ukrainian sources, that the 47th Mechanized Brigade is almost non-existent at this point. They were pulled out, and there was about a battalion-sized unit left. That battalion-sized unit was then sent to Kursk. So that's the situation at hand. They're pulling out units off of the front line that are completely combat incapable, combat inefficient, destroyed, and sending them to Kursk because they have no other options. They have no other available manpower, and at least you're sending some experienced guys somewhere. So that's really the situation, and that's what I'm talking about. The Ukrainians just trying to hold on until November. But yeah, let's go ahead and look at some of the other areas of the map now. Kharkov, still intense fighting here. Not a lot of serious changes. Down here in the Oskal River region. So now we are reaching one of our first hot pockets, guys. The Oskal River region is collapsing rather quick. The Ukrainians have yet to be able to stabilize. It is now officially divided into the northern salient and the southern salient along the eastern bank of the Oskal River. And as we zoom in here, we can see that this is now a pocket, right? The road, the Russians have advanced into Kalibrated. Sorry about the names again, guys. This is torture for me. And have reached the Oskal River right here, cutting the highway and main logistics line, running up and down from Kupiansk down to, Lebanon area down here. I'm sorry, not Lebanon area. Lebanon is down here, more like, I guess you could say Lebanon, but more like this area, because this is where the logistics run right here, right? So these are now 2 separate areas. Logistics now have to run from down here all the way up to support these areas. So expect the Russians to begin pushing down the Oskal River right here from the north, and that's how you're going to see most of the advances. Some are going to come from the east, but it's going to just be a push down this highway right here along the river, cutting off supply lines and forcing the Ukrainians out of this bridgehead. Up here to the north, this is the actual pocket, right? This is the area where the Ukrainians are now really stuck, and there will likely have to be a withdrawal. You can see that the Russians are pushing in on Petropavlivka. Again, this is one of the hardest areas in Ukraine for the Russians to push. They've had a significant amount of difficulty trying to reach Kupiansk, because Kupiansk is just the perfect staging area for the Ukrainians in this area. It gives them a massive advantage, but the Russians are now closing in. Once this road right here is interdicted, whether by fire control or physically, the rest of this salient is going to become basically untenable for the Ukrainians. They will have to retreat into Kupiansk, where we will likely see a battle on this side of the river. And the Russians will have to push the Ukrainians to the other side of the river, where I believe the action will stop. And then, it'll continue down here. But this pocket is now in desperation mode. This advance right here is really, really not very good for the Ukrainians. And it's just going to explode north and south, because now you're looking at areas that are definitely cut off. Like, I would say that this is all gray zone probably at this point. Just because of how close the Russians are to the highway right here. The situation is definitely difficult in this area. Oh, we got some questions here. Sorry, I just came back over. Weird that Ukraine refuses to support their strong, well-fortified Eastern Front, which would be vital to keep holding onto. But what do I know? That's perfectly sound reasoning, and that's very logical, right? That makes great sense. The only issue you have to look at is the Ukrainians have no chance of winning that war, right? I talked to you about this, death by 1,000 cuts, right? So they could choose to sit in the east and eat artillery shells and glide bombs until they have no more manpower, right? That is a possibility. Or they can look at the already deplorable and desperate situation and say, we can try to change the equation by doing X. Kursk, the Kursk offensive was that X factor, right? It didn't work out for them. Obviously, it was a low odds gamble, but you had the choice between 1,000 cuts in the east or one glorious battle in Kursk, and they chose, right? It plays into the Russian advantage, though, if it doesn't work out. So instead of burning a candle short, like on one side for a long time, they burned it at both ends, and it goes out quicker. And thank you, Tim Gibson, for your super sticker. I appreciate it, man. All right, guys. Okay, so that is the Oskal River region and what is happening. This movement right here is very important, so pay attention to this area very closely. Moving down, Russian forces have made a small advance out of Vishinev down here towards Pershataneve. That one I got a little bit better, I think. Again, you're just going to continue to see these movements. You can see that along the Kharkov and the Luhansk Oblast line, there is another encirclement. But I don't really think of these as encirclements as much. I think of this as kind of gray zone that the Russians can't push into and that the Ukrainians don't hold, right? And so you can see that the Russians are moving along this string of settlements right here, and that is because there are actual, at least solid roads. They're dirt, potentially, but they actually have some solidity to them so that they don't turn into muck in the winter. All right. Moving south, we have nothing in the Seversk area. We have nothing more in the Chasiv Yar area. Lots of fighting happening in Chasiv Yar. You can see that now that there are 1, 2, 3 big bridgeheads, that Chasiv Yar is definitely in a difficult position. But this is one of those areas that the Ukrainians are going to invest everything into, because if Chasiv Yar falls, holding the east makes almost no sense. So this is still the most important city, I would say, for the Ukrainians in terms of maintaining their current posture in the eastern parts of Ukraine. Again, we talked about the canal here that runs along the high ground, the dominant high ground in the region. Once the Russians capture Chasiv Yar, they will move up into this region, potentially backdooring Seversk over here and just creating a lot of issues in this area. Once they have this canal secured, they will be looking down on Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Druskivka, and Konstantinivka. So vital area right here for both sides. And as you can see, the Russians have made crossings over into Chasiv Yar. All right. We have a small advance in Toretsk. Seriously, there is some serious fighting in this area, and the Russians have now advanced through the central park, is what they called it, area right here next to this substation, just really expanding their zone of control in the center part of the town. Brutal fighting in this area, but I think we can expect to see some movement in Toretsk. More than this, some more movement into this industrial area and onto these terkuns through this week and into next week. It's been about 2 weeks since we've seen some serious movement here. No, it's been about a week since we've seen some serious movement here. And reports from the front line is that basically from Chasiv Yar down to Ugledar, the Russians are back at full force now. A bunch of the men who had been rotated out have now re-arrived. They're fresh on the front line. Rotations are now complete, and we're going to see much more intense Russian offensive operations into, Chasiv Yar, Toretsk, Pokrovsk, and then the entire southern flank of Donetsk. All right, guys. We have one small advance here, nothing major, just a fortification captured right outside of Novo Alexandrivka. And this is, again, important because it's heading in the direction of the ring road. But as you can see here, there's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 strong fortifications. And these 3 fortifications are connected by a defense line. So it's going to be difficult to reach this. It's obviously one of the more difficult areas to push, but again, a small Russian advance here. All right, now moving down to Sadov. This is the second hot pocket. This is where the Ukrainians are probably in the worst position right now, just in terms of supply. I mean, this is a legitimate encirclement at this point. Again, how the Ukrainians continuously find themselves in these encirclements over and over and over and over again, your guess is as good as mine. I'm not really sure. It's this no retreat nonsense. It's this German mindset, German World War II mindset that the Ukrainians seem to embody fully. So up here to the north, we have a Russian advance through Lysivka. I think that more than half of the town is under Russian control, but I'm just going to leave it back here for now. No point in getting ahead of myself up there. And through these fields, the Russians have made some slight advances, most importantly along the E50 here. Remember, I talked about this. I said, because we were looking at it when Karlivka fell. I mean, guys, look at this map. Look at this map. It was not long ago I was talking about Tonenke, Severny, Orlivka here, Semkivka, Berdichi, Avdiivka, Umansk. I mean, it's crazy how fast things are moving. This is a completely different war from what we've seen previously. It was like August when I was talking about Karlivka and Kalinove. Novo Hardivka was like a month and a half ago. So things are accelerating incredibly quick. I mean, we are now, what? I used to do this regularly. We are now 36 kilometers from Avdiivka. So the map has changed significantly in this area. It's why we talked about Avdiivka being so important. Once you broke through those fortifications, this entire chunk, it's still fortified, but it's just not at the same strength as Avdiivka was. All right, so Sadov. The Russians have advanced along the E50, and I had talked about it. It runs from Donetsk up to Pokrovsk. It is the most important highway for the Russians right now, and I said that they were going to move along it, right? Because the connection from Donetsk to Novohordivka gives the Russians a jumping-off point for future offensive operations. And they are going to continue along the E50 because it's a solid paved road, a highway, really. All the way up into the southern portion of Pokrovsk. So just expect that soon. But more immediate is the effects that this is going to have on Sadov. I talked about there being a logistics line from the south that has been physically cut by the Russians. The one from the east here that runs through Petrivka and through Hirnyk and Vishneve here has been also likely cut or interdicted by the Russians. You can see how close they are. They have direct fire on this road. FPVs are watching this road. So good luck getting logistics into here. And the Ukrainians are now reliant on this single road of life, which, as you can see, is also, if there are Russian positions in this tree line, as my map shows, they are now less than half a mile from the road, well within rifle range, well within mortar range, well within FPV range. So the supply situation into Sadov is now deplorable for the Ukrainians. Again, name a better combo than the AFU in a pocket they shouldn't be in. That's, again, the situation that's developing. The Russians are advancing through the eastern portion of the town. I have not mapped any of that. I am waiting, but Russian assaults are in full swing, and with the degrading logistic situation, we should expect I don't think we're going to see a Ukrainian withdrawal, because Sadov is vital, right? There's nothing back behind Sadov. It's like Avdiivka, but worse, right? Because Sadov is not that strong, right? But what's behind it is a ghost town, ghost towns, ghost villages back here that are completely useless for defense. So Sadov is of vital importance. It is also holding the southern flank of Pokrovsk. Once this falls, Pokrovsk and Minhorod are going to become the major objective. And I had been saying for a long time, I have an actual comment from one of the group chats I'm in, that the key to the Russians moving into Minhorod and Pokrovsk over the muddy months, because that's what I think is happening. The mud is now arriving. It's not going to be as bad this year, I don't think. It wasn't as bad in the spring either. We will likely see Sadov falling quickly, and then the Russians focusing on Minhorod and Pokrovsk through the rainy season. I think it's very important that they get into an urban area with lots of streets, so they don't have to worry about getting stuck, and they can actually focus on a fight that's going to continue to degrade the Ukrainian armed forces while they are, kind of limited in what their movement is in terms of armor and stuff like that. So again, two big advances here. This advance down to the south, cutting this southern road, and then this advance up here to the north, likely interdicting this road to at least. And the Ukrainians are now complaining about the situation in Sadov. Everybody seems to understand the reality of the situation, and it's only just going to continue to degrade as time goes on. All right, moving down to the third quote-unquote hot pocket, guys. I don't know if you prefer like the pizza one or the ham and cheese one. I think ham and cheese is goated. I think it's like the only one I've ever actually eaten. I don't eat that many hot pockets. They're kind of disgusting. But if you're a fan of hot pockets, this is the ham and cheese hot pocket right here, right? This is the creme de la creme of pockets in terms of the Ukrainians overstaying their welcome and the Russians just breaking through the lines where the Ukrainians are supposed to be very strong. You can see back here that this salient is incredibly deep. Again, likely, when you guys see things like this, when you see two big Russian advances like this, it usually means that a majority of this area is sort of uninhabited by the AFU, right? These big advances come when there are no Ukrainian defenders standing in the way. So Ukraine has been battered here. The northern flank of Hirnyk has broken. The eastern flank on the Vovocha River has also been broken. Zoryane right here has been likely fully captured. It's hard to tell where the exact line is here. I just kind of put it to the outside of the settlement just because that makes the most sense from a tactical perspective. But this fortification is the most important aspect across the river. It has been captured. The Russians now have this bridgehead across the Vovocha River. Very, very bad news for this defensive fortification and these two urban centers right here. So again, over the next week and a half, expect a Ukrainian withdrawal from these two settlements down towards, down towards Stary Turny here, which is where they have to go. You're looking at a 12, 13 kilometer retreat. And that is going to end up putting them in the position to defend Hovyv. Unfortunately, if we look at a topographical map here, I will show you guys what I am talking about. Let me get it up. All right. All right, so here's Hovyv. And then here you can see these are the areas that the Ukrainians are, that I just talked about them retreating from. So Hirnyk is half captured. The Russians have crossed this Vovicha River. You can see how this was a very defensible position too. This was a good area to defend. You have water barriers that you have protecting your flanks. You have high ground, central high ground in an urban area to defend from. So there's a reason why this hasn't fallen much quicker, and that's because it is an actual very, it is very advantageous for them to stay in that area. I'm going to scoot this forward just a little bit. But yeah, so once that retreat happens, you can see how the situation for Hovyv is going to become much more difficult as the Russians get onto these high grounds right here. There's a Terikon, and a Terikon. Once the Russians get in here, they are going to be able to look directly down across the reservoir at Hovyv. They're able to fire ATGMs, direct artillery fire, call in glide bomb strikes. Again, Hovyv is going to become another pit that the Ukrainians are going to hold on to until the absolute last moment, because, again, there's not a lot behind it. So this is the spot, right? This is where they have to defend. The Vovicha line, and then down to Hovyv. But it's faltering very quick, as we're about to see. All right. Back over to the map. All right. Down here, on the route to Hovyv now, I do think that this is actually considered part of Hovyv right here. This is the outer Evrons of the town. So Russian forces have advanced slightly. There was a video of a flag being planted here. Again, this is going to be a difficult area for the Russians to push in because of the strong flank right here that they are currently enjoying. Once this falls, the Russians are going to gain access to the high ground right here. Might change the equation a little bit more. But you can see that there are some very, very strong defensive lines in this area that the Ukrainians are going to utilize. And they run... They're much more connected and bigger than what you see here now. This is old mapping. There are connections between these fortifications and stuff like that run along this tree line. So this is going to be another strong defensive area. But the idea, I think, is that the Russians are going to be pushing from the south, going to be pushing from the north, and they will likely just be able to surround Hovyv the same way they've done with Sadov, the same way they did with Ugledar, the same way they did with Mariupol, the same way they did with Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, the same way they did with Soledar, the same way they did with Bakhmut, the same way they did with the Robitny salient. They're going to. This is just the modus operandi of the Russians, and the only reason it works every single time is because the Ukrainians refuse to learn the lessons of their bloody mistakes that they've already made. Like I said, Mariupol, surrounded and trapped. You could make an argument that they held out and they were delaying the Russians or whatever. Mariupol was the goal. The land bridge was the goal. They knew that. That's why they stood their ground. They didn't retreat. They held out, and the garrison was destroyed and captured. If you look at Lysychansk, they overstayed their welcome after Severodonetsk fell. They tried to counterattack multiple times into Severodonetsk. That failed. Got into a pocket, and then a rout happened back to the Seversk salient. Look at Soledar. Soledar was enveloped. Ukrainians were trapped, killed, and then same thing happened to Bakhmut just to the south, surrounded. And Bakhmut was a particularly bad encirclement because they just sat there. They weren't even the Ukrainians weren't even fighting the Russian army. They were fighting Wagner. The Russian army was resting through that entire battle basically, and they just kept that road of life open and just hammered it and let the Ukrainians come in, and the Ukrainians would not back down from Bakhmut. Don't know why. Sacrificed a lot that could have been used in their counteroffensive. counteroffensive happens, they get into the Robotny salient, and they're in another salient, another encirclement. Same thing happened in Avdiivka. Same thing happened in Ugledar. Same thing's happening now. I can't describe to you how bad of a strategy or how bad of strategists the AFU is dealing with. I don't know who's in charge, like really, and who's making these decisions, but they need to be summarily executed for incompetence and stupidity on a repeating level that is mind-boggling. I mean, you're just sacrificing men for no reason. No reason. Ugledar, just back out. You're going to lose it anyway. You're not going to hold it. Just back out. Why? Why do that? Because Zelensky was in Washington and you didn't want it to be embarrassing? That's ridiculous. So this is really the Ukrainians really have some serious strategic and tactical misnomers. I don't even know what you would call it. They seem to think that this is a winning strategy or the best strategy applicable for them, and it's just not. Wow, Scott, summarily executed, no due process. No, you get hundreds of thousands of men killed in the most ridiculous, stupid engagements. You deserve to be executed, right? How is it anything other than, first off, it's almost murder how they're treating their soldiers, right? That's bad. They're just sending them into these, like, look at this. Look at this. How do you let this develop? How does this happen? How do you let this develop up here in Sadov? How? Protect your flanks. You know what the Russians are going to do. You know where they're coming from. And if you can't, then don't get encircled. Back out, right? It's really not complicated. But, you know, the Ukrainians are dealing with PR more than they're dealing with actual military strategy. So that's why they're failing. That's why they're going to continue to fail. And all you have in the Ukrainian military are yes men now. All they're doing is saying yes to the political needs. There's no military input that went away with Zaluzhny. The reason why Zelensky got rid of Zaluzhny is because on multiple occasions, Zaluzhny told Zelensky that he was wrong in what he was doing, right? And who did he replace it with? The butcher of the AFU, Syrsky. It's very open and honest what they're doing. They can lie about it. They can run you around a tree, but at the end of the day, it's obvious. Don't think they can execute Zelensky, Scott. Well, they should. That would be the best thing for Ukraine. You want to talk about the single best thing for Ukraine? Probably not the best thing for Russia right now would be a coup or an assassination of Zelensky that allowed the U.S. to put in somebody who either ran the war better or was able to negotiate with the Russians. Both of those options, I think, would be the worst for the Russians because the Russians are steamrolling right now. They're hyper successful. If you know the numbers, there's about 700,000 Russian troops that are engaged or planning to be engaged or on rotation from the SMO zone. So that means that there are guys, like I said, they've just come off of rotation, off of the summer. They're now back, and you're about to see a lot of a much higher intensity of fighting in some of these areas with new, fresh troops, right? Ukrainians aren't getting any of that. And with that amount of people, the Russians could technically win whenever they want. And I know that's going to sound like kind of arrogant and like, oh, well, why haven't they won yet? For a couple reasons. Number one, they've committed to this attrition style war. This is how they're going to fight this war. Don't change it. It's working right now. Don't mix it up. If the opportunity presents itself for a big breakthrough or something like that, go for it then. But your time is on your side. You're not in a rush. The second thing is the Russian economy. The Russian economy is now on a military footing. It is running extremely hot. A lot of people are like, oh, the Russian economy is this, that, or the other. They have an excess of cash that they're trying to get rid of all the time. That's literally the situation that they're in. And yeah, interest rates are high and stuff because they're trying to keep everything stable. But at the end of the day, the average Russian, in terms of their purchasing power, is much better off now than before the war, which is a ridiculous thing to say. That's crazy to say out loud, because that's not how Western sanctions should have worked. But in terms of being on a war economy, you're running hot. You need the war to continue so that your economy is bolstered off of that. That's the steps you've taken, right? That's why the Russians wanted to negotiate in Istanbul. They didn't want to have to go onto a war footing and mobilize and go into mass production of military equipment and stuff like that. It's expensive. You have to transition your whole economy, and there are risks that come along with it, right? So the war going on for another year is probably a guarantee, just because the Russians need the war to keep the economy stable right now. All right, let me get through these updates real fast here. Thank you for your question, though. All right, so there is a small Russian advance here, but it's a very vital Russian advance. They have pushed the Ukrainians off the 0532 highway. I talked about this extensively. This was the go time for the offensive, right? We're already seeing it. It's already playing out. You can see how far the Russians have advanced across this entire area. They used to be back here by Novomihailovka and through these fields, all the way down through these towns down here, Pavlivka and south of Ugledar. That's a thing of the past, right? That doesn't even exist anymore. But most importantly, the Russians now have their supply line from Donetsk through Marinka all the way down to Ugledar, into Pavlivka, and then all the way up to Velika Novosilka when they eventually capture it. That is going to mean that Russians just have ease of logistics right here, right? Which sets them up for further advances into this giant open area. So this advance is vital. It doesn't necessarily mean that transport on this road is safe yet. However, there should be a gray zone here, and the buffer is widening and widening, and soon you'll have Russian vehicles transporting along the 0532. All right. Here in Katarinivka, the Russian forces have cut the road in between Katarinivka and Antonivka, and have captured probably about half of the village. Remember, I talked about this being a very ill-defensible place for the Ukrainians because there's this Suki Yali River right here. This river sort of creates a peninsula where the Ukrainians are going to have a hard time retreating across. I think there are some like almost land crossings right here, but again, highly targetable and difficult. So I think that most of this area is empty, and now the Ukrainians are just enjoying the defensive fortification that they have across the river. All right, and that is it. That is it for updates today. Well, that take us 40 minutes, 42 minutes because I was yip-yapping. The sad thing is Putin agrees with you 100%. Today, Putin said they will not be negotiating with anybody anytime soon. Well, why would they? Why would they negotiate at this point? They negotiated they tried to negotiate, early on in the Civil War in 2014, 2015. They finally got Minsk, right? That fell through. They got Minsk 2. That fell through. There were negotiations before the invasion. Those fell through. There were negotiations in Istanbul. Those fell through. There were some negotiations after Istanbul, but it had mostly ended. If you look at it from a Russian perspective, on all of those accounts, the West or Ukraine sabotaged those negotiations. They were led by the nose. And this is admitted to by Angela Merkel, whoever the French president or president was at the time, and whoever the English prime minister was at the time. I can't remember who exactly it was, but they're all quoted as saying Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 were to buy time for Ukraine. Boris Johnson came in and tanked the Istanbul negotiations. So if you're a Russians looking at this, you're saying to yourself, well, am I going to be led by the nose for the umpteenth time? Or am I just going to solve this problem myself and solve it permanently so I never have to deal with Ukraine again? I never have to deal with the Western NATO countries trying to use Ukraine against me. We just have to solve this problem. Negotiations have never worked. They're never going to work. End of story. Military means is the only way of negotiation at this point. It's sad because of what it means for the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian culture and the country of Ukraine. But the moment they decided to go along with the Ukraine project in the West was the moment they signed on for complete destruction, right? You look at the ANA, look at South Vietnam, look at the Kurds, and you'll see exactly what's going to happen to the Ukrainians. I've been saying this for 2.5 years, and people still refuse to believe me when I talk about this. Ukraine, the AFU is going to be another sob story. We will see helicopters evacuating people off of roofs. I guarantee it. It is our pattern. It is our policy. It's how this is going to work. I guarantee it, because a ceasefire is a no-go, right? A ceasefire has openly been stated by the Russians to be an attempt to rearm Ukraine. They're not going to let that happen, right? A ceasefire is pointless. It just means you're going to be fighting this war again much harder in 5 years. That's stupid. Don't do that. Ukraine is openly talking about nukes or NATO. And if you're a Russian and you're sitting there looking at that, you're going, well, that means that we have a terrorist regime. They consider them terrorists, that is attempting to either join enemy alliance, which will bring that to our border, which is the reason why they invaded in the first place, or develop nukes, which is another reason why they invaded in the first place. If you guys remember, Zelensky said in December of 2021 that they were going to try to reach the nuclear threshold to prevent a Russian invasion, this, that, and the other. The Russians invaded. All right, it's very simple, right? Don't say stupid things and you won't have to find out. But Ukraine is about to find out for sure. All right. I have a couple of articles, and then I have some, I want to talk about Lebanon and Hezbollah and stuff like that, Israel a little bit, so we'll get into that. And then also the Moldova referendum thing that happened recently. All right, so heading over here, CNN, Defense Secretary Austin visits Ukraine amid Russian gains and ahead of imminent U.S. election. So again, this is what I'm talking about, right? Trying to make everything look good, trying to make it seem like everybody's on the same page right before we're going into the elections. Don't give anybody any false ideas about that $300 billion we sent there that is going to be completely wasted and doesn't need to be discussed anymore, right? Especially right before an election. No, we don't want that. And we definitely don't want Ukraine to collapse. So come and check up on your proxy, make sure he's doing good. He's not, but that's okay. So I'll just read a little bit of this. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin arrived in Kiev early Monday morning as the future of U.S. aid to Ukraine hangs in the balance of the imminent U.S. presidential election. And as Russia continues to make small but steady gains, always gotta detract on the battlefield. Austin met with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and Defense Minister Rustem Umerov while in Kiev to discuss Ukraine's weapons needs and how the U.S. can continue to support the country's military over the next year. So if you guys don't know, there has been no congressional approval for military aid to Ukraine. The $8 billion that we just gave to them was a use it or lose it. $8 billion that was in the budget previously hadn't been sent over. That's what the U.S. is currently siphoning from to maintain weapon shipments to Ukraine. You see like a $300 million, $400 million aid package every 2 to 3 weeks. Those are just simply logistics packages. That's like a paycheck being cut to Zelensky, basically. Those, I mean, not that he's stealing it, but like he gets it every 2 weeks, right? He's expecting it. He needs that. This is another. I think that this is a bad sign. I don't see why Lloyd Austin would be needing to go to Ukraine right now, other than to reaffirm the U.S. position, try to get something done on the back end. But most likely, he went there to deliver a message. He went there to say, "You better not f this up before the election because it's going to make us look very, very bad." I think that's exactly what he's trying to do. So there's that. Another visit and another small aid package delivered to Ukraine. Nothing changes, and just more false promises and nonsense. All right. And then this was just sort of interesting. It wasn't really super, topical or anything, but why is Ukraine's army facing a why is Ukraine's army facing a desertion crisis? Thousands of men have abandoned their posts, blaming poor conditions on the front lines and open-ended service. So one of the things that will really piss people off is if you deny them rotation to go home and at least see their family for a short time, and you don't pay. These are the two things, because people have families to feed. And that's part of the problem that the Ukrainian armed forces are running into right now. So more Ukrainian soldiers have deserted the army this year than ever since the onset of a war that analysis say has seen both sides make gains and report losses. I don't know. Yeah, that's what a war is. Prosecutions for desertion from Ukraine's army are thought to have hit at least 30,000, quite possibly much more. What do we think that means, chat? Tell me, chat, is Ukraine cooked? 30,000 minimum. What? That's crazy. That's so many men. Already this year, this is several times the number in 22, the year the war began, when citizens and foreigners voluntarily poured into the military to push Russia back. And then they were all killed. Right? Bro, you're telling me you're losing 30,000, you lost 30,000 fighting men this year. That's not 30,000 people leaving the country and some of those are men of fighting age. No, this is 30,000 soldiers have gone AWOL in your military. I think that I'm under the impression now, and this has been a developing thought for days and days and days as I've been seeing all of these reports coming out. And the reason why I'm saying that they're really holding on to the election is I think the situation for the Ukrainian armed forces is just so much worse than probably most everybody thinks. I think that their casualties are much higher than any estimate that I've given. I've always estimated on the cautious side. I think that their, MIA is ridiculously high. I think that their, like we talked about, their AWOL, abandonment, possible mobilized men, or men that could possibly be mobilized, fleeing the country, this sort of stuff. I think the situation is so much worse than we actually know. And I'm very careful to say that because, my prediction was that the war was going to end in 2026, but I don't have a lot of numbers, right? I don't have the Ukrainian casualty numbers. I don't have the Ukrainian monthly mobilization numbers. I don't have numbers for Ukrainian equipment or anything like that. All I can see is what's on the battlefield right now. The Ukrainians are running through their Leopards, their Abrams, their AMXs, which I didn't even know they still had. They're using up every last little bit of resources they have right now, especially in Kursk and stuff. Like I said, the 47th just got rotated out of Avdiivka. There's a battalion left, and it got sent into Kursk, probably for this counterattack that we're seeing. So I'm now under the impression that it's probably like 25% worse than everybody is seeing it. And this winter is going to be devastating. It's just going to be devastating for the Ukrainian armed forces in terms of territory lost, in terms of casualties, in terms of everything. This winter is going to be so deciding that I'm thinking that the war might come to a vicious and rapid end, especially if Trump wins the U.S. elections. Yeah, that's sort of the position it's starting to look like, and it's going to be with a whimper and not with a bang, the way that a lot of people think maybe it might end. All right, that is it for my articles. I did want to talk about the situation in Lebanon and with Israel a little bit. The world is sort of waiting with bated breath to see what Israel's going to do, right? And I've talked about this extensively. If you guys go watch the video I did with Brian, we get into this in depth. By the way, video with Brian Berletic is up. Also, I have another podcast up. I'm going to advertise it at the end. So if you want to see more of my content, I did an in-person interview with a guy that I kind of consider my lawyer. And so I'll show you guys that. You can go check them out as well. Israel is in a position where like the Israeli state is not particularly strong. It doesn't have a strong population. It doesn't have a gigantic economy. The military is actually rather weak. I mean, it's advanced, but when you don't have a huge like reserve pool, casualties are brutal. You can't sustain high casualties for any period of time. Their equipment, while being high end, their Merkava tanks have trophy systems and stuff like that. While all that is there, the number of tanks that they have is limited. The number of drivers they have is limited, and they've been in an urban battle, not taking extremely high losses, but still attriting the military in Gaza for over a year. We're watching them attempt to push into southern Lebanon with very ill-fated results, and it really just kind of goes to show that the IDF is not anything close to a professional organized army, I would say. I mean, on a small scale they are, but when it comes to their ability to actually invade southern Lebanon, say, Hezbollah looks extremely competent in the last 3 or 4 weeks of this, operation into southern Lebanon that has achieved basically nothing. They've crossed maybe a kilometer in some areas, blown up a village on the border. Nothing is being achieved of any significance, and that's very concerning for the Israeli leadership. They knew this before they started. They knew it since 2006. They've been watching it in Gaza. In Gaza, you're fighting tunnel rats, and that is not demeaning to Hamas. They are literally just in tunnels. The Viet Cong used tunnels. They were tunnel rats. They did amazing work with those. But you're fighting a trapped enemy that is not receiving outside logistics and help at all. They've been trapped for quite some time. You have complete air superiority, and you still can't not take casualties in Rafah, in northern Gaza, all over the place, right? And this is part of the thing, this is sort of what we talked about, was that, if Israel is going to go into southern Lebanon, if they're going to go into Gaza, they have to use their Air Force. And when they use their Air Force, they're just dropping bombs on everybody. And when you drop bombs on everybody, drop bombs on refugee camps, you drop bombs everywhere, and you cut off food and you cut off water, and people are dying in the streets, their kids are dying. What are you creating? A new army. So while Hamas has taken casualties, absolutely, they keep getting this influx of young men who have nothing to lose, literally nothing to lose. Their families are dead. Everything's gone. They don't have work. What are they going to do? Kill the people who killed them or killed everybody around them, right? Same goes in southern Lebanon. You bomb Beirut, you bomb all of these towns in southern Lebanon, you're just creating a new army. And Israel can't create that new army, right? They don't have the population to pull from. And this is the strategy for Hamas and Hezbollah, is make these conflicts so costly. You're never really going to win, but you're going to force the Israelis to lose. And then you can sign some peace deals like they did in 2006, whatever, wrap it up. Israel can't have that anymore. And it's mostly Bibi and the current leadership. Israel would be fine if they didn't do all of this and they treated their neighbors with a lot more respect. And, they didn't let their guard down ever. Don't let your guard down. I know Israel is not a loved place in the Middle East, but Israel's making active decisions that's making everybody hate them far more than they ever would have. And so that, that's kind of my whole take on it, is like, you're fighting these wars, but really you're just creating bigger wars for yourself. And that's what Israel wants. At least that's what Bibi wants, Netanyahu. He wants this war with Iran. He's been talking about a war with Iran since 1996, right? This has been a long time stated policy and objective and goal, is to have the U.S. fight Iran for Israel, right? Because then Israel has complete dominance over the region. So, in doing so, everybody's just waiting for this Israeli response. There was some leaked documents that came out. I was actually very close to that leak. I was talking with people before. I wasn't close to the actual leak. I just saw the information before everybody else kind of saw it. And the reason why I think that the strike plans, if you guys don't know, the Israeli attack plans for their strike on Iran was leaked. I think that was leaked by somebody either in the Pentagon or in the White House, trying to prevent an Israeli strike and an escalation into a war before the U.S. presidential elections happened, because that's going to really, really hurt Kamala, the Biden admin, whatever, in their ability to win this race. So those plans were leaked on purpose, obviously. And that has likely prevented Israel's attack, at least for the time being. I've been under the impression that they're likely going to wait until the election anyway, because if Trump gets into office, or Trump's going to come into office, they can just go ahead and first strike Iran's nuclear facilities and get it over with, right? Israel doesn't want to be in a position where they strike something, Iran responds in a disproportionate manner and really damages Israel's ability to effectively take out those nuclear facilities, right? The whole goal is to prevent Iran from achieving a nuke, which if I were them, I would already have one, but that's just me. And as we wait, there are a couple of options, right? The Israelis could go after the nuclear facilities, as I said. They could go after military targets alone, which I don't think really achieves the deterrence that they're looking for, or they could go after the oil. The oil is probably what I would say. I mean, nuclear facilities are obviously horrible, but the oil is probably one of the worst choices, because if you strike Iranian oil facilities and you close the Strait of Hormuz, you close the Red Sea, because the Houthis will begin operating at a higher intensity. And if all of Saudi Arabia, all of the Middle East oil facilities are hit, I mean, that's going to skyrocket the economy, and we're probably going to go into a world war just based off of like resource wars at that point. So, I don't know what their plan is. I don't really think they have a good option. I think what they're hoping is that the U.S. will come in and shit kick Iran for them, and then they can just dominate the region for the next 50 years, however they want. I don't know. I'm very worried about this, because I've seen how unhinged and how much free agency Israel seems to have when it comes to these things. I do think that Washington is on board with most of it. But Washington has different timings than Israel has. Israel needs to go now. Every day that the war continues in Gaza, in the north, they're suffering economically. They're suffering materially. They're just suffering, and they're weakening and weakening and weakening. So time is of the essence for Israel. Expect this strike to be something way over the top, completely disproportional, and then expect a wider regional war. And I think that's going to happen after the election, before Trump's inauguration. All right, guys, if you want to go ahead and get some questions in, I can answer some questions if you have any. We're just big chilling now. I'm done with all of my stuff. That takes us to 1 hour and 2 minutes. Oh, let me show you guys that thing before we get into the questions too much. I'm just going to look up the episode I was on. All right, so here it is. He's a small YouTuber. He just got started, but he is a lawyer, and he focuses on the legal aspects of different things. And we had a conversation right here, episode 8. As you can see, 829 viewers compared to his 100 in the other videos. I got that pull, baby. But if you guys would please do me a huge favor and just go like his video, subscribe if you don't mind having it on your feed. He posts, every couple weeks or so, has some pretty interesting talking points. So I have known that guy for a very, very long time, and he's good people. All right. Israel strikes Syria recently. It's beginning, sadly. They've been striking Syria for forever. That's just going to keep happening. What do you think of Trump's recent interview where he threatened to strike Moscow? I think Trump says a billion things and he does none of them. So this is what you have to understand. He is a sensationalist. He's always been a sensationalist. He exaggerates all the time. It's what he does. Stop taking his words as literal fact. He's actually a very, and this is going to sound like I'm glazing Trump, but I'm not. I don't care who gets in. I don't think it makes any difference. I think we're going to be in a war with Israel, whether it's Kamala or Trump. I don't think it makes any difference. I don't think it changes the aid to Ukraine. Nothing changes. What I really think the difference is that what Kamala is saying, I mean, she's lying. She's just trying to get elected, same as Trump, but she is actually going to go through with some. Sorry, that was my dog. She's going to go through with some of the things that she's talking about. Whereas Trump, you know, he the big thing in 2016 was, oh, he's going to come after the Muslims, right? Because it was ISIS was popping up. It was a big deal. That was like a whole thing. He had like the Muslim ban, never really, you know, and Muslims in the country never had it much harder than they had it any time before, right? Nothing really changed. The economy was good, so they were doing fine, right? Nothing really changed. Trump is like I said, he's a sensationalist, but he's competent, and what he does when he gets into office is he kind of bullies people. Instead of hiding, like Kamala's going to hide. If she gets into office, she's going to have all of her advisors doing everything for her. She's going to be sending people to do the talking. She's going to appear when she needs to appear. Trump actually goes in and basically tells people what they need to do. That's kind of the difference for me. Like I said, I don't think either are really better. I think that the direction that the U.S. is heading in is sort of unstoppable, right? It's stoppable, or preventable, but nobody's really on board with preventing it. Everybody's just kind of doubling down. So I don't think it changes anything. What event would make US and EU stop supporting Israel? Nothing. Maybe Europe would stop supporting them if they used a nuke or something, or they really started going hard in the genocide paint. But nothing. You got to remember, we are in a World War-esque situation where, while you might not agree with what somebody's doing, the alliances that you have are more important than your moral obligations to specific things, right? That's just the situation we're in. And you know, if Israel loses or Ukraine loses, the situation gets much, much worse for Europe. So while they might have disagreements about how to go forward, this, that, or the other, at the end of the day, Israel is a forward operating base for the United States in the Middle East. It gives us plausible deniability. We give them all of their weapons, all of their funding, everything. We support them entirely. They have F-35s, F-16s. We just gave them a THAAD. We're probably going to give them another THAAD, which is another reason why I don't think the strike is coming for a little bit. They're requesting a second THAAD, which I think would mean that they have 3. Unbelievable. That's 3 out of 7 THAAD batteries we have. So, you know, we keep them afloat. That's our 51st state. That is our forward operating base in the region. That we like that. We like having it. We can't, for geostrategic reasons, we cannot lose it. End of story. What's the best way to call into question reports that claims one side or the other has suffered more total losses? Are their methods accurate? You know, it's really, really hard to say. The way I go about it, it's pretty simple to actually figure out who's taking more losses. Who has the worst positioning in Ukraine? Who has the ability to utilize their air force? Who has the ability to fire more artillery shells, at unlimited artillery shells, basically? Who has better drones? You know, the answer is very clear, right? The Russians are not taking more casualties if they're firing artillery shells at a 10-to-1 ratio. That is a ridiculous sentiment to even hold. There are no meat wave attacks happening. We're not seeing mass casualties on battlefield really at all anymore. It doesn't really happen. Motorcycles are being utilized. So you see one dead guy off a motorcycle, but not a BMP with 8 dudes on top that got hit and then spontaneously combusted. I don't know. It's very clear which side is taking more casualties. One side is ganging people off the street. tying them up, throwing them into a van, and forcing them into a trench. The other side is enjoying massive volunteer ratios. They haven't mobilized since 2022. It's right in front of you. It's so clear and evident. In terms of actual number claims, I think Washington's estimates, which follow Mediazona pretty accurate, are likely correct. I think 300, I mean, this is like a couple months ago, but 300,000 Russian casualties is probably accurate. And then you do a 1-to-4 injury to fatality ratio somewhere in there. You're talking about 75,000 KIA over 3 years of Europe's largest war, compared to what I would probably consider 300,000 or 400,000 dead Ukrainian soldiers. So dead, not wounded, dead. That's how they've been holding these lines for so long, guys. It's just meat brigades. But in terms of actual numbers, I mean, the only thing you can really do is like go off of open source data like Mediazona. But again, you're going to get a lower number than the actual number, probably. All right. What do you think the Israeli strike will be? Could Yemen be a curveball? No. I think they're going to go for the nuclear facilities. I think that if Israel's going to commit, they're just going to commit all the way. Because there is no coexistence in Israel's mind with Iran. This has been law basically since the 90s. They just won't exist in the same area. They can't, for whatever reason. You know, they all think that they have the right to some holy dirt or something. Stupid as shit. But whatever. No, I don't think Yemen's going to be an aspect. I think it's just going to be exactly what I just talked about. The strikes are either going to be on oil facilities, military facilities, or nuclear facilities, or all three. A THAAD battery can stop like 20 missiles at a time, right? So 3 THAADs would stop 60. It can be meaningful for protecting specific targets. True. But that's if your interception rate is the same as it would be on a test range, which it absolutely wouldn't. It'd be much lower. Remember, air defense is a numbers game. You're just hoping to prevent incredible amount of damage to a specific area, not prevent all damage to a specific area. If your air defense is intercepting 100% of everything, you have god tier air defense that's infallible, and doesn't exist. I think the Russians have the best air defense in the world. And it's just this propaganda of like what air defense doing when the Ukrainians launch 9 Storm Shadow cruise missiles at a single target and 1 gets through or 2 get through. It's like, yeah, that's called a saturation attack. That's why you launched that many, is because you knew exactly how many you would need to get through defense. Same thing Iran did, right? Israel has David's Sling. They have very decent air defense. All it took was 180 missiles to overload that. And you saw 35 strikes at one base, dozens of strikes across Israel and other areas. So, yeah. Yes, Russia has been delivering radars and air defenses to Iran. Why do Americans cry when other countries kill them? Because we're superior, and one of our losses counts for 3 losses of people in dirty countries. Duh. It's literally for that reason, though. It's Americans, Western countries in total, are not accustomed to any sort of human loss. It's like not a part of our psyche at all. And if we get into a real war and a lot of boys start dying, you're going to see how it dramatically affects the U.S. population, right? Usually it galvanizes us, but not if it is a expedition, right? Only if we are attacked first. So before we get into a war, expect a casus belli to fool all the stupid people. What are your predictions for the next month? Like how? I'll talk about this. Go over to the map real fast. I'm under the impression that this is going to close rather quickly. I think it will close before the end of October, at least up to this point, because the Russians are already halfway through Hirnyk. They're going to have to leave this area here shortly. So this by November, I think that a majority of this pocket will be closed. I think you're going to see some rapid expansion through these fields right here, south of Hovyv, and south of Hirnyk right here. Through these fields, capturing this high ground now that they have access to this road. This area is not really very defendable for the Ukrainians. So expecting a massive amount of advance in this area. That would be through November. But again, we're entering into the muddy season, so it's hard to predict where the Russians are going to be able to have success. My predictions also for Velika Novosilka, Holyai or Orikhiv are also definitely in play, but I think we may see this a little bit later into December as the ground starts to really harden. But again, you never know where a breakthrough is going to come through. So that's sort of an unknown. I also think you're going to see Sadov fall probably early November sometime. I think that's realistic for Sadov. It might be earlier, just depends on how much strength the Ukrainians have. See, part of the issue with any analysis that I give is that I only really know half of the equation. I only know what the Ukrainian or what the Russians have, because they're more open about what they have and what they utilize in terms of manpower, in terms of their losses, this, that, and the other. I have no idea what the Ukrainians are doing. I don't know how strong they are. I only have rumors and hearsay. If the Ukrainian army is at its end, and this is the last week, any prediction I give for you is going to be completely, incomprehensible after that happens. So I think Seladove and then this pocket right here are where you should probably be watching most closely. And then through November, the Oskal River region up to the north. You're talking a lot of nonsense, Iran, brah. Okay, sweet, dude. You know what you should do? You should go start a YouTube channel where you talk about Iran, because obviously you know everything. This is okay. You disagree with my opinion? Cool. Glad you wasted your time typing that out in chat, homie. Will the AFU lose another 30K defending Pokrovsk? No. No, they don't have 30K to lose. Yeah, no, that's not. There will not be another drag down slogfest like Bakhmut. This chat is full of Empire bootlickers. Bye. What is that? I don't know what that is. His little thing. It's funny. What about the problem with the development of F-35s? I don't know any of that. I mean, other than you mean the way over budget entirety of it? Like the $2 trillion they spent developing it? I don't know. Do you think Struzda will have to be stormed, or the AFU will eventually withdraw from Kursk? The AFU will eventually withdraw from Kursk. As soon as the Russians end up pushing up to the rear up here, as soon as the Russians push up and cut this road, this will be this R200 road right here. They'll push down and they'll capture this. There won't be the ability for the Ukrainians to sit in this area anymore. If Russia hired you to do the SMO, would you have done something different? With hindsight, absolutely. With hindsight, absolutely. If I was going off of the Russian perspective at the beginning of the war, I mean, as a Westerner, I think I have very different ideas, and just my mental process has been sculpted by a Western education system, Western culture. So I have a very different reaction. And this is something that I think that people don't understand, is that Americans have a very different reaction to events than Chinese do, than Russians do. We react differently. We react similarly to how Western Europe acts, because we kind of, they're our vassals or whatever. But I think that after Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, after I had openly watched them screw me over, if I was Vladimir Putin, after that event, that would solidify my ideas about the political situation in Washington and how they're approaching me and how they're coming at this whole conflict, right? And then leading up to it, I would have staged a lot more men on the border just to begin with, in hopes to actually prevent the conflict and get Ukraine to back down. Right? So other than that, I think that the Russians went in, they captured 20% of the country incredibly quickly. They were putting pressure on Kiev the way that they had hoped. There were some bad ambushes, some stuff like that. You know, we saw some bad stuff in Bucha, not the Bucha stuff, but, you know, in terms of like the ambushes that the Russians got into. But that's kind of what you expect from any peacetime military that's going into like a high intensity war out of nowhere. I mean, you're expecting mistakes to happen and stuff like that, expecting a little bit higher casualties in the beginning, everything like that. So no, I don't really think they did anything wrong. I think they just had an incorrect idea about what was going to happen once they got to the position that they found themselves in March, right? They were at the door of Kiev. That should have been when the negotiations happened in Istanbul. That should have been the end of it, right? But you can't rely on a vassal to make decisions for itself. And when Boris Johnson came in and said, "Don't do this," after that, I would have gone much, 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 much harder on Ukraine instantly. Putin went soft. He continues to go rather soft, in my opinion. At this point, the Ukrainians would not have electricity. They would not have sewage if I were in charge. Those ports would not be open. Ships would not be coming in for fear of being just sunk immediately. I would be going much more escalatory than Putin went, because I'm looking at this and I know that the U.S. isn't going to do anything. We didn't do shit for the ANA. We didn't do anything for South Vietnam, right? We're not going to do anything. This is a proxy. We do not care. If this was Israel, totally different story. I think we'll ride in on a white horse for Israel any day of the week. Ukraine, not a chance. Not a chance. So if I was the Russians, I would be going much harder. I would be striking much more important civilian targets in terms of infrastructure. And I would just be making life so difficult for the Ukrainian people that the military almost can't operate. And we're still not at that point. There are still restaurants and nightclubs open in Kiev 3 years into this war. And the Russians have plans for when they move in, but I think that all of those plans are sort of a fool's errand, and you're just going to have to go in and do what you have to do and basically turn Ukraine into Russia at this point. I think that's the only option you have if you want to avoid this exact same war in 5 years. So. Iran doesn't have nukes. No, it wouldn't make a difference. If Iran got a nuke, the U.S. would probably step in at that moment. And like literally. No, I don't think it has anything to do with having nukes or not having nukes. I think that having nukes would make you a much more destructive foe to go after. But I don't think that the U.S. would ever allow Iran to actually build a nuke. I don't think Israel would allow Iran to build a nuke. And I know that, they can do it in secret or whatever. You've seen how good Israeli intelligence is. It's hard to hide a nuclear program like that, right? They've been saying they are 2 weeks away from a nuke for decades. It's tiresome, but no, I don't think the nukes make it any difference. I think that the real difference is the U.S. can shit kick Iran with their air force if they need to, right? They can do a Desert Storm. And it's not going to be as clean. They're going to take losses, whatever. But the U.S. can beat Iran. The U.S. cannot beat Russia. That is abundantly clear. And to the nuke point, if you go to war with Russia and it escalates into a direct confrontation, nukes are going to be used immediately. Mutually assured destruction. Nobody wins, right? So there is that aspect. But I think if if the U.S. wanted to go to war with North Korea, if something showed up where they were like, hey, we need to go to war with North Korea, those nukes are not preventing that, right? So you say, what's my YouTube channel? Does anybody know? Yeah, it's Kalibrated with a K. Kalibrated. Kalibrated with Scott. Iran did an underground nuclear test. No, well, there was an earthquake. There was a small earthquake. Some people might think that it was a nuke. I don't think it was a nuke. I think that everybody would have made a much bigger deal about it, just like they did with anytime North Korea does one, right? The area where that earthquake happened is on a fault line. So I'm going to go ahead and just be the naysayer and say that there was no nuke detonated. Why did the Russians storm Toretsk instead of encircle it? Well, if you look at the topographical map, taking you over to the colorful map right here. If you look at the situation, the Russians didn't have to encircle it because it's on the low ground, right? They already have the high ground. They have the elevation. They can push in. And to encircle it, you would have to go through these open fields over here or through these open fields over here. And it just doesn't make a lot of sense when they have had a pretty easy time getting through. As soon as those first defenses broke, now you're into a once those first line of defenses break, now you're into the less developed defensive area and into the urban battle. And something that we've seen throughout this entire conflict is that Russia dominates urban warfare. They crush. Anytime they get into a city, Ukraine takes an absolute beating, and the Russians operate with extreme professionalism. Where the Russians seem to suffer is more out in the fields. So once you're in, you don't. The issue, the reason why you surround a place is because you can't breach it, right? Toretsk was already breached. They don't have to encircle it. You can see that from Sadov, right? So they're having a very hard time pushing into Sadov. I'll take us over to the map so you guys can see. The Russians are having an incredibly difficult time pushing into Sadov, right? They've been on this Telecon. It might be in the gray zone. They might kind of control it. I've just left it as is. They've had an incredibly difficult time pushing into this area because this is on a high ground right here, and this is a massive residential apartment complex area, right? So they have a sort of high ground they can watch, and the approaches are out in the open. It is difficult to get a foothold in this side for the Russians, right? So instead of sacrificing thousands of men to make it in, what they are doing instead is creeping up the flanks, doing it very efficiently, and now they won't have to fight for to breach that area. The Ukrainians will just be forced out, right? So that's sort of the difference between there and then when you come over here and look at Toretsk, this is a great defensive position for the Ukrainians. There's high ground here. Until recently, Kleshchevka wasn't pushed out. So pushing up through here would just expose yourself tremendously and doesn't offer the same benefits as other towns that you can surround, right? It would be very difficult to cut all of these logistic lines that are running through here from Konstantinivka. So once if you remember, the original line was like right here. Like they haven't progressed. Wait, no, right here. They haven't progressed that much, right? But once they got through these difficult fortifications in this area, you can see all the fortifications, all the lines down here. Once they got through these were the ones built in 2016. This is now much more advantageous for them, moving a building to building. I know urban warfare is usually a nightmare, but the Russians are very adept at fighting in it, and they've only gotten better through the multiple long engagements they've endured. All right. Always a good show. Thank you, Scott. I'm glad, guys. I'm glad you guys like it. Let's see. If you guys have any more questions, get them in. That takes us to an hour and 30 minutes. Man, I'm just talking today. Kalibrated. G7 said that they supported Zelensky's plan to join NATO. Is this serious or just talk? Just talk. There's nothing beneficial about Ukraine joining NATO. Not beneficial for Russia. Not beneficial for NATO. The only person it benefits is Zelensky, and they can't do that. In my former military, no sir. I have some firearms training, but no combined arms training. I was never in any, I wasn't in the Marines or the U.S. Army or anything like that. I was about to, and then I just decided that it wasn't for me. And I'm very glad that I did, because my friend joined the Marines and he did 2 tours. The only thing he did was sat on an aircraft carrier the entire time. Didn't do anything. And my friend knows absolutely nothing about military, like anything about like real combined arms. Like he couldn't do any of this. And that's not a dig on him. That's not what soldiers are meant to do. So unless you're talking to somebody who's an officer and an officer of not a peacetime army, like we have General Ben Hodges, who has been wrong consistently, like Kramer wrong, to a point where you wonder how he got his stars, right? And that's a symptom throughout all of, well, it was a symptom in the Russian army until about a year and a half into this conflict. You saw the Russian peacetime army get absolutely at times in Ukraine because they had incompetent officer corps. They had inexperienced soldiers, right? That's all gone. You're not seeing the same mistakes anymore that you saw earlier on in the war. So things are definitely changing. I am not military, though. No, I don't believe that, in my personal opinion, I don't believe that being in the military helps you to read topographical maps or satellite maps or understand how battles flow any better than anybody else. I think that nerds who sit in their dark rooms and read endless material on battles and strategy and stuff like that are much more capable. Because when you think about what analysis is really, it's information gathering. You have to decide what information is pertinent, and then you have to translate that. Well, I translate that into a presentation for you guys, right? I utilize my map that I've created. I utilize articles that I read, stuff like that. The only person that I would say would have better experience than me outside, not military necessarily, but intelligence. People who work in the intelligence community are much better at this than I am, usually, because of their hands-on experience with dealing with this exact sort of stuff. A grunt or an NCO, they're going to have tactical experience. They're going to be able to tell you what it's like to be shot at or have an artillery shell land next to you or something like that. But are they going to be able to tell you on what attack vector the Russians should enter Ukraine from if they wanted to open up a new salient? No, why would they know that? That it's not compatible. They might have an idea like, hey, let's take the high ground because I learned that, but I've also learned that. So that's sort of my position on the whole military thing. I think actually what ends up happening is you get a lot of these people who are in militaries, and then their whole analysis is completely uprooted and biased towards that sort of group. You see, everybody who comes out of the U.S. military thinks that the U.S. military is like the bee's freaking knees. So like, that is always a bias that they add into their equation. And it's just kind of like I don't know. I think it sours it. But I understand why people might not want to listen to me if I don't have military experience. So like, what do you know? What do you know? You're just on here talking. You just created a YouTube channel. Yeah, I did. And if you want to go back and look at my body of my work, you can tell that I've been right. And I'm just going to go ahead and stick with that. And I'm just going to stay in that little pocket where I am continuing to be right with the direction that this war is going. And what's going to happen. And my predictions have been solid, at least for the last year. Right. So yeah, that's just, that's sort of my take on that. Iran respond if Israel attacks its nuclear sites? Absolutely. Yes, absolutely, without hesitation. If Israel does anything more than a face-saving strike against Iran, which they cannot do, Iran will respond in kind, yes. How does Russia crack the Pokrovsk-Minhorod situation here? The capture of Seladove. Once Seladove is captured, this entire southern flank is going to be very, very difficult to defend. The Russians will gain more access to the E-50, be able to bypass some of these fortifications, or get behind them and compromise them, and then we'll start to see more progress towards Minhorod in general. Pokrovsk is going to be much, much more difficult to hold once Seladove is gone. Good question. You've put in a lot of hard work. The writing has been on the wall for a long time. You've just had the nuts to read it aloud. Yeah, that's what I say. That's what I say. All of my predictions, guys, all of my guesswork, it is just like mathematical. All you have to do is look at the math of the situation and understand that if one side has X and the other side has less than X, the side with X is probably going to win, barring, an outside collapse, which we are not seeing from Russia. So it's pretty straightforward. Ben Hodges was wrong. Yes, he was. He's been wrong multiple times. He was talking about the Russians fleeing Crimea because the Kerch Bridge was down. He is the epitome of Western incompetence in high military positions. And this is something that I talk about frequently. Wait until the U.S. gets into a war. Just wait. You know the mistakes and the incompetence that you saw from some of the Russian military leadership at the beginning of the conflict. It is going to be that times 4 when the U.S. gets into a near-peer conflict and they're actually getting their asses handed to them in some way or another. Like the Russians got their asses handed to them at some points throughout this Ukraine conflict, right? And they are now the beast that we set out to prevent at the beginning of the conflict. We've created this monster. They're highly capable military now. They're a highly capable military. Their officer corps is the most experienced in the world. Their pilots are the most experienced in the world. They have the most flight hours. Their military industrial complex is humming. The amount of military budget is increasing. The sophistication of the military is increasing. We've literally created the monster that we were hoping to destroy and pull away from China. How is your weed withdrawal going? Really good. Really good. I mean, I'm manic as shit. I've been going since like 4 a.m. this morning. I went to Walmart. I went to Costco. I've gone to the gym. I did all my work. I took my dogs out for walks. I did everything. And it's only 3:37 right now. And I've been talking for an hour and 37 minutes, guys. This is my life. I'm just going all the time. Thank you for your support in my addiction issues. Marijuana is great. It is indeed. If Ukraine had to choose between Pokrovsk and Chasiv Yar, which one would they choose to defend more? Both. I mean, both are... Either way, that is a 50-50 bad choice. You get to either choose, you're going to either lose from the center or you're going to lose from the south. That would be like losing Izum in the north. It's like those are all very comparable things. Izum, Chasiv Yar, and Pokrovsk are all in similar positions where if they fall, the consequences are going to be game-breaking. Do you think Russians have any kind of plan for managing safely the West's defeat in this conflict? The West is not going to be defeated in this conflict in the same way, and in the way I think you're leading on. The West is going to be defeated in a geostrategic sense. They're going to lose out on Ukraine. They're going to lose out on this project, the money that they invested. The economy is hurt because of it, whatever. But the U.S. isn't going anywhere. The U.S. is still a very strong economy. We're geographically isolated. So I don't think there's really going to be a defeat of the West. I think it's going to be the defeat of Ukraine, and the West is going to go, oh, well, we tried our best to support them, but it's Ukraine. What are they going to do? Just like we did. Oh, did we lose in Afghanistan? Not really. I mean, you can say that we lost because we pulled out and we don't control it anymore and we don't have a government in there. We were in there for 20 years. We dominated the place the entire time. The only time the enemy started succeeding is when we decided to pull out, right? And yes, the pullout was ugly and it was a disaster, but did we really lose? We maintained our hegemony for 20 plus years while we were in Afghanistan. I mean, it was I would say it's sort of our, for if we were the Roman army, it would be our Britannia, right? It would be our a bridge too far, our foreign war that we can't win because you're never going to win the hearts of minds of people that are completely culturally different than you, that don't want you there. But after Rome left Britain, was Rome done? No, it existed for hundreds of years after. So, we will be weakened. But I don't think the Russians really need to prepare for that. What they need to prepare for is the consequences of actually winning this war in a significant manner. And that will be massive investment into former Ukraine, which is now going to be Russia or whatever. Yep. David Petraeus is another one. Hey, I joined in late. Might have already answered this question, but is there any truth to North Koreans having fought? No, that's just a troll. That flag got put up. It's funny that they did that too. It's so funny that they're reading all of the news and stuff. It's goofy. No, they just did that to troll. I haven't seen again any proof that there are any North Korean troops in Russia, and if they are, I imagine they're there for training purposes. When do you think Russia hits the mark? Also, what do you think their current target is? I'm sure their target is totally different than 2 years ago. Well, 2 years ago it was negotiations, right? That was their target. Now I would say it's definitely the 4 oblasts at a minimum. Likely you're going to see Dnipropetrovsk also go, probably Kharkov, probably Poltava, probably basically everything on this side of the river. The river just makes sense, guys. The river just makes sense. And remember, there's nothing here. There's nothing in this area at all. Nothing. This is where everything is. After this is done, it's over. And the Russians are almost on the edge of it. This is literally the edge of it right here. Up into Kursk. So yeah. Not a good situation. You already asked that. I smoke weed. Yeah, I smoke. I was smoking probably like an ounce every couple weeks. I would smoke like an ounce of weed. I was burning through it, literally. What do I do for a living? I have a number of different income sources that I operate off of. Partially, some of my YouTube revenue pays my rent. But other than that, I do other stuff that I'm not going to say because I really don't need people ruining my other lines of work with all of their stupid, petty bullshit because they don't like that I map a conflict. So. All right, guys. That's where I'm going to wrap it up. I'm exhausted. An hour and 43 minutes. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this today. I am back on my normal schedule. I'm feeling much better. So starting tomorrow, I'm going back on my regular off live stream schedule. So expect a daily update and expect the Patreon demonetized episode. I think we're on episode 19 or 18 now. So that's going to be coming out. I'm also going to potentially start trying to make YouTube shorts. So you might see some of my YouTube shorts on there. I think that helps the algorithm getting my videos seen more. So I'll probably be doing like short little update short videos for the Ukraine war. So be on the lookout for those two, guys. Thank you so much for all of your time. Thank you for all of your questions and all of your attention. It's mind-boggling that you sit here and listen to me talk for an hour and 44 minutes and 15, 16, 17 seconds because I'm an idiot and you all know that. And but I appreciate you being here so much. So take care, have an amazing week, and do something for somebody else. Make somebody else's life easier, please. It all comes back around. All right, guys, take care. Have a good day.